straight gray hair. I wear glasses. The rims are tinted navy and green. And I'm wearing a navy blue t-shirt and a necklace of wooden beads that are red and brown. This is the second event of the spring 2023 season, and I'm excited. We have with us tonight Ohio's own Yali Sawida Kamara and Orchid Tierney. And we claimed them both even though they were not born in Ohio. We have given them honorary citizenship here, and we refuse to let anybody else have them. Unfortunately, our friend James Cruz had a very sad last-minute emergency that called him away from our event this evening, and he sends his heartfelt regrets. And in my sadness for James, tonight I have become even more vividly aware of how his work has soothed and comforted so many of us as we make our way through difficult times in our lives, with his weekly poem posts in email boxes and on social media. Not just any kind of poem, but poems that will melt your heart and uplift your spirit. Poems that can change a bummer day into a, I think I've got this kind of day. So a huge thank you going out to James for all he does to bring light into this dreary world. Our hearts are with you tonight, friend. We'll have a short Q&A after the readings tonight. So please feel free to type your questions into the Q&A or later into the chat window. And now, Yali Sawida Kamara is a Sierra Leone, Sierra Leonean, I'm saying this, I'm so sorry, American writer, educator. Sierra Leonean American writer, educator, and researcher, and forgive me for that, Yali, from Oakland, California. Serving as the current Cincinnati and Mercantile Library Poet Laureate, she is the editor of the anthology, What You Need to Know About Me, Young Writers on Their Experience of Immigration from Hawkins Project in 2022, and the author of A Brief Biography of My Name, African Poetry Book Fund, Akastic Books 2018, and When the Living Sing, Ledge Press 2017. Kamara has been a finalist for the National Poetry Series competition and the Brunel International African Poetry Prize, and is the 2023 winner of the Copper Nickel Jake Adam York Prize. She earned a PhD in creative writing and English literature from the University of Cincinnati, an MFA in creative writing from Indiana University, Bloomington, and an MA in French culture and civilization from Middlebury College. So I had been a great admirer of Yali's work from afar, and then I had the opportunity to meet her in the flesh this past December. And I can tell you, she is every bit as wonderful as I suspected. These days, she can be found hanging out with folks like Ross Gay, who was, by the way, one of her former teachers, and setting up workshops at the Mercantile Library in Cincinnati, for which she charges a whopping 5 cents for folks to attend. And I'm sure that she lets people come on loan. They don't necessarily have to have the nickel up front. So I'm thrilled to welcome my friend, Yali Sawida Kamara.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. It is such a pleasure to be here. Carrie, thank you so much for this invitation and for all that you do for poets in Ohio and beyond, and I gladly accept my citizenship. I'd also like to thank Joe and Nico for the ASL interpretations tonight, Devin and the Stuart's Opera House for putting everything together. And I'm looking forward to reading alongside Orchid this evening. And thank you all for showing up from all over the country. So I will be reading poems from my book, Biseidu, which won the Jake Adam York Prize with Copper Nickel, and will be published in January of 2024 through Milkweed Editions. So the first poem I'm going to read is a poem about my mother who figures heavily in this book. And this is a list of rules that she's provided me with. And my mother is almost always right, but I don't tell her that too often. So this is for my mother. This is all true. And the poem is called Mother's Rules. Mother's Rules. 1, if you see me praying in the living room, never sit in front of me. You are not God. 2, when we go to a restaurant and I don't know any foods on the menu, never order me a meal that is spelt with silent letters. I came to eat, not to explore. 3, you didn't make food. No, God did. You cooked food. Watch your English, watch your faith. 4, your Creole is offensive. When you speak, you sound like Shabba Ranks. Your accent is funny, but keep practicing. It is the only way we will be able to gossip in peace while at the supermarket. 5, try to learn the language of your lover and his family. They could be smiling to your face and getting ready to trade you for 6 goats and 3 mules during your first trip to their homeland. 6, if anyone stares at you for too long, more than 5 seconds, start speaking an imaginary language while maintaining eye contact. They will be the first to look away. 7, consider the consequence of purchasing human hair wigs, secondhand clothing, and used furniture. Maybe you will feel beautiful and also save money, but you never know whose bad luck or misfortune will be sitting on your head, body, or in the home in which you sleep. Buy what you can truly afford. 8, your father's Muslim, so you are too. 1989 to 1993. I am Christian, so you are too. 1993 to 2012. I am Catholic now, but you keep praying. 2012 to present. 9, you laugh at me now, like I laughed at my mother, like she laughed at hers, like your daughters will laugh at you, and I will live long enough to forgive your folly. 10, just make sure to pray. Amen. The next poem I'm reading is a poem based on having a name that is an unusual name in America and thinking about the ways sometimes children with unusual names get looked over in the classroom. So this is a poem about my name. Space. At the age of 7, a letter was plucked from my name as a test to see who would catch the error, to see who'd care enough to go search for the rest of me. For about 4 months, my name appeared as Yale on the page. A part of me wonders why some names are sweeter than others and become the nectar that pools at the base of our memory. Would anyone let Zabel or Richard or Elizabeth or Sinclair escape from the 9th letter of the alphabet? Me and my broken name, less heavy than before, began to float away to somewhere else. No search party was sent to check between the monkey bars, under the desks, my cubby, or the palms of my hands. There was no red pen to correct the flaw. Nobody else played the game, so there's no record of the joyful sound that was made when the long lost me found the small brown eye. This next poem is about my nephew, who's now 15, but this was written when he was 3 years old. And I often find that children are the best poets as they explore and play around with language, and language is sort of their lab. And my nephew, he would often use the word Black as an adjective for things that he was excited about. And so we just started to notice the way that that color was used in his speech patterns. And so this is a poem about my nephew. It's called Sweet Baby Fabulist. And as some of you probably know, a fabulist is someone who creates fables or someone who is very invested in lying. And so, yeah, you be the judge. Sweet Baby Fabulist from my nephew, Elijah. In the 3rd year of Elijah's life, Black olives were Black and green olives were Black too. Even the bubbling pot of sunset-colored palm oil and plaças was given the name Black soup. He so adored Toli that he'd watch Ni Hao Kailan every noon. Toli was no longer a koala, but now his favorite Black cartoon. Black was the boy Elijah, and his finger tugging at heaven for fire. Black were his dimpled knuckles when he pressed his hands to pray. Black was the hue of the peace that he desired, the anointing oil he rubbed on all that made him smile throughout the day. Black is what he called the world because he heard it from his Black mother. Black is what he called the universe to show us how much he loved her. Black were the rainbows, the full moon, and the deep nightfall. Black were the rivers and sky. God was as Black as the autumn breezes call. Black was as crisp as the crust of sweet potato pie. Black was a brilliant pulsing light, too bright to be ignored. Black sings the joyful chest from which all fears have been unmoored. Black is the sight of a little boy finding his reflection in all things. Black is what a little boy called us, so what else could we sing? If Black is the chorus, an eternal echo of this one-word song, then what is the color in the hollow of the mouth that would tell him that what he is living is wrong? The next poem I'm reading is a poem about an experience I had in Barbados. I had a sort of mentor there, Miss Margaret, who told me that in Barbados, when you perspire, when a Bayesian or Barbadian perspires, or a Black person perspires, on their skin, you can see the rainbow. And so this is a poem about an experience with her trying to find the rainbow on my skin in the summertime in Barbados. Souvenir. Come, do this, Miss Margaret calls out to me. And so I leave her air-conditioned office, then follow. We stand here under the hot fist of this Bayesian sky. Each of our right arms is extended. She rotates her wrists, then I swivel mine. Our bracelets clang against the wind, against the shack trees' gentle drumming, against the barren parking lot's cratered face upon which we plant our feet. We begin to melt from woman to solid to liquid. From the main office window, it must look like we are dancing, though if our shadows told the story, it would say that our limbs are trying to twist the world like a wind-up toy. She points to the first sweat beads that congregate at the shore of my forearm like a handful of cabochons. They burst into prismatic rivulets. Miss Margaret watches my summer flesh alchemize. She is wide-grinned as I learn the secret, how in this season we become Black opal under each other's watchful eye. A week later, I smuggle myself through customs. In America, I try it again and again, the magic trick in which I make a rainbow of my skin every time it storms in this nation I call home. So this next poem is about Gabby Douglas, who feels like a little sister to me, and is also a sports hero and someone that I deeply admire. And I noticed during one of or some of her gymnastic competitions during the Olympics a few years ago, there was quite a heavy emphasis on her physical appearance and a lot of commentary about her hair and not about her grace and her heroism and her talent. And I was disturbed by the ways that she was pulled apart by the media and on social media. And so I wrote a series of haiku love letters to her as a way of affirming who she is in her majesty. A haiku love letter for Gabby Douglas. And I'll just kind of count them out with my fingers. Nappy wins the gold. Medals hang from 4C curls. Your head holds glory. They said focus on your edges. They must have meant both ends of the vault. The problem is you love yourself whole. This is the most dangerous act. Bend, but do not break. Your backflip, a metaphor for this whole Black life. If you'd placed your hand on your chest, then we wouldn't have heard your music. Gabby, come knock on our doors. Ask us what we've named our dolls and daughters. While mothers pray for your flight, babies watch your wings caress gym skyline. We hold you close, smile when we touch the forests that grow on our own heads. This next poem is called New America, and it's a meditation on being a first-generation American. When sometimes, especially in youth, sometimes it's hard to not fit in ways. And so this is sort of, I think, a wish or a dream that my younger self had. And yeah, if there are any folks who are first gen or know the difficulties of moving from one place to another, or can feel their otherness in different ways by virtue of location, this is for you. New America. Give me a kite that will twist its leash in flight to Oakland's sapphire expanse. Give me tradition free from the thickness of horror. Trick or treat without my mother's fear of sewing pins and sedatives nestled in the chocolate's core. Give us some good news, an edited issue of the Oakland Tribune with every splayed corpse cut from its pages. Nimble fingers to make papel picado from newspapers, Christmas or Ramadan, religion that will not leave me questioned, a dance and song that make me too lovable to hurt, shears to cut the tightrope umbilical cord, a flag whose fabric I can read, liberty or its synonym. Give me smelling salts to quell this leg of the Atlantic voyage. Give me sunscreen for my face and arms, a sturdy cradle rocking me back and forth at the shore of the Pacific, a lullaby, a hush, whisper with ocean breath that this is mine. Give me a torch to melt all of the pennies saved to buy this Volvo parked in an immigrant's daydream. Give me an onyx cutlass supreme, blaring Donny Hathaway from its cushioned innards, anthems to sing in a language that I want as my own. A Black that is steadfast and opulent, which is to say dangerous and infinite. Give me a voice that will not remind my parents of their homesickness, or maybe earplugs, paper, and a pen. Give me a quiet home. Give me a new America. Give me a new America or a new me. Give me a landmass that reeks of apple pie and bleach, a silent pledge of allegiance. Give me a license at 16, wheels and gas and a hula girl rocking on my dashboard, a Hail Mary with no map, a minute to escape the sound of my misshapen name surfing off the cliff of every tongue, a minute to drive towards the blue, a careless twirl toward where I think I might belong. This next poem is a poem about a word that is a word in Creole, which is my first language, which is Sierra Leonean Creole. And it's just thinking about the depth of the word. This language or this dialect has many words from English that are just nestled in the language itself. And this is a word that makes me think about the weight of history and how it still figures in my family story. Freeborn. In Creole, there is a word with Atlantic Ocean spray still swirling in its gut. Freeborn. I heard this word often after dinner was prepared. If, say, my sister and I couldn't help but shovel soft, clementine-hued heaps of jollof rice into our mouths on our way to the dining room, my mother would stop us, demanding that we only eat after sitting at the table like freeborns. I should tell you that she would then tuck herself into the corner of the kitchen, standing up, no sound from her, but the harpsichord clink of silverware against plate. Freeborn, I'd still like to teach her to. Freeborn, eyes closed, I imagine us freeborning somewhere far from this beige bungalow, ripe with the smell of stewed onions and tomatoes. We freeborn elsewhere with the coastal view on our beach chair throne. The waves' fangs hungrily rise before us. Freeborn, I give my mother this old language. Watch her grip it between arthritic fingers. Watch her toss the fossilized noun verb back far, far enough to hit the water in its tonsils, far enough to choke the entire sea. This next poem, and it's the second to last poem that I'll be reading, is entitled American Beach, and it was the winner of the 2023 Elizabeth Alexander Creative Writing Awards and will be published in Meridian's Journal, which is housed at Smith College, and it's an incredible journal, and it's an honor to have received a prize in the name of an amazing poet, one of our former poet laureates of the US, and is just a phenomenal thinker. So yes, this will be out in the fall of 2023. American Beach. I don't mind when she approaches me, a stranger on North Walnut Street, who only tells me about what she sees while reaching two fingers in to retrieve it from my hair. She squints a bit, fights the menace of hot silver Hoosier sun, and relieves me of a problem that for her rests too close to me. A deep plunge into my curls, I wait to see how far she goes. And because I miss the hands of the women I know, I think I'd even let her hook her unfamiliar fingers into the lace of my wig, but she stops short of me feeling completely like home. It is an American beach leaf, green as opposite of red. She pulls this weightless raft from inside the crown of me. In small town, downtown, there is a woman who does not know my name, but calls herself my mirror, haptic grace. She holds the leaf to my face, then releases it to flow slowly down the vertical river of air to the pewter concrete. I don't mind when she approaches me, a stranger on North Walnut Street, taking a leaf, leaving her fingerprints to sing and sing and sing so close to our skin until I hear my own voice say, I feel you too. How mighty, the God portal of human touch. So the last poem that I'll be reading tonight is the titular poem for my collection, Biseidu. And This is a story about something that happened many years ago. And I think I wrote the poem about 5 years after it happened. And yeah, this poem is very close to me, and I'd like to dedicate it to James, who cannot join us tonight. And I look forward to reading with him, reading with you, James, at some point in the future. But this one's for you. Biseidu. While sipping coffee in my mother's Toyota, we hear the bird call of 2 teenage boys in the parking lot. One says, Biseidu, the other returns as they reach for each other. Their cupped handshake pops like the first fat firecrackers of summer. Their fingers shimmy as if they're solving a Rubik's Cube just beyond our sight. Moments later, their Schwinn's head in opposite directions. My mother turns to me, revealing the milky John Waters mustache thin foam on her upper lip. Waiting them Biseidu, na English? She asks, tickled by this tangle of new language. All right, she says. All right, I say, be safe, dude. I pull apart each syllable like string cheese for her. Oh yeah, dem na real paddy, she smiles, surprisingly broken by the tenderness expressed by what half my family might call thugs. Biseidu, 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 we chirp in the car, the nightly into our phones after I leave California. Biseidu, she says, as she softly muffles the rattling of my bones in newfound sobriety. Biseidu, I say years later, her response made raspy by an oxygen treatment at the ER. Biseidu, we whisper to each other across the country, like some word from deep in a somewhere too newborn pure for the outdoors, but we saw those 2 boys do it in broad daylight under a decadent, ruinous sun. Biseidu, Biseidu, we say, Biseidu, and split one more for the road, for all this struggle, tumble, drown. Biseidu, we say, to get on the good foot. We get off of the phone, tight like the bulbous air of 2 palms that have just kissed. Thank you so much.
Oh, Yaley, that was so wonderful. I so love your work. And I made a few notes. I kind of like to make a little bit of comment, and I'm sorry, I know I sound terrible tonight, but I didn't want this to go. First of all, I love the poem that you started with about your mother when she's telling you to watch your English, watch your faith. I love that so much, the juxtaposition of those two. And then later she mentions that your accent sounds funny, but she wants you to keep practicing because she says it's the only way you're going to be able to gossip without people interrupting you at the supermarket. And I thought that was just so beautiful. And she warns you to be careful because someone will try to trade you for goats and mules. I mean, it's so great. And that if people stare at you too long, more than 5 seconds, then backtrack. Go ahead and start speaking in a different language, because then they will cut the eye contact with you and they'll look away. So it's kind of a way you can use it as a defense mechanism. I thought that was great. And then later on your poem, a person, Miss Margaret, talking about the sweat on your body. And I thought, just so absolutely beautiful, Yaley. You said prismatic rivulets, I believe is what you said. And talked about becoming black opal. Let's see, I can't read some of my own writing. Oh yeah, okay. And then the next one, I loved all your haiku. I mean, that is so clever to put together a tribute in haiku, and in particular for this particular woman who makes her incredible living, as a gymnast. So she's always moving and quickly, and these beautiful haiku. Um, and the fact that, as you said, the comments that were being made had very little to do with her incredible gift of prowess and how hard she's worked. Um, and I think you started out with something like "Your head holds your glory," because they were talking so much about her hair. Um, and then later, someone actually walks up to you and removes something from your hair. And you talk quite a bit about that, how she squints and fights the sun. And she calls herself your mirror, you say. She calls herself my mirror. Um, I loved that. Of course, freeborn, you give your mother language, and she tosses it. She tosses it far enough to choke the entire sea, and that just so vivid. Your work is so visual and just so beautiful. And then, of course, Biseidu. Oh my, what an amazing poem. So thank you for all of these beautiful, beautiful poems tonight, Yeli, and thank you for being here. It's just such an honor to have you. So thank you very, very much. Orchid Tierney is a poet and scholar from New Zealand who now lives in Gambier, Ohio. She is the author of the collection A Year of Misreading the Wildcats from the operating system in 2019, and 7 chapbooks looking at the tiny, mad lichen on the surfaces of reading, Essay Press forthcoming, My Beatrice, Above Ground Press 2020, Ocean Plastic, Blaze Vox Books 2019, Gallipoli Diaries, Goss PDF 2016, Blue Doors, Belladonna Press 2018, and The World in Small Parts, Dancing Girl 2012. Her scholarship, reviews, and poetry have appeared or are forthcoming in Jacket 2, Vinti, Fractured Ecologies, Substance, the Cambridge Companion to American Poetry and Politics since 1900, among others. She is the recipient of an Ohio Arts Council Year 2022 Individual Artist Excellent Awards and is the Black Earth Institute Fellow for 2022 through 25. She is an assistant professor of English at Kenyon College, and you can find her at orchidtierney.com. And so Orchid and I have only met via social media, but I greatly admire her work, and I've come to know that Orchid walks gently on this earth, and I love that. And I know that everyone here at Spoken at Her is going to love her work, so I'm very excited to welcome Orchid Tierney.
Oh, thank you so much, Carrie. Thank you so much, Devon and Stuart Opera House. Thank you, Carrie, for the offer of honorary citizenship. Like Yali, I'm definitely going to. I definitely take that offer up. Thank you, Joe and Nico, for your amazing ASL interpretation. And I'm sending my thoughts to James this evening as well. I really look forward to hearing him read at a later date, and I'm very excited and appreciative to be here amongst such amazing company. I'm a woman, and I with pale complexion, with medium length hair, brown hair, and I'm wearing glasses. I'm wearing a red blazer with a black blouse and a red scarf, and my favorite color is indeed red. I'm going to read something a little bit different. I'm going to read from my poetic lyric essay looking at the tiny mad lichen on the surfaces of reading. And this essay is an exploration of madness, surface reading, and the poem Springtime in the Rockies, lichen by the beat poet Lou Welch. And of course, it's about lichen as well, which is my most favorite organism on the earth. Lichen are the tiny collaborators of the forest, two little personalities of fungi and green algae, little wows, tiny tubs of collegial kinship between organic components, two personas, little knowledges living among filaments. Naturalist Trevor Goward proposes that lichens are fungi that have discovered agriculture. Seeing lichen through this anthropomorphic lens as farms of sustainable husbandry might limit our full appreciation of the meticulousness of these tiny infrastructures. Goward persists, however, to insist upon their complexities with increasingly descriptive language that underscores the variety of their functions and relationships. Lichen as dietary strategy of certain fungi, he writes. Lichen as range extender for photocells. Lichen as controlled parasitism. Lichen as mutualism. Lichen as fungal greenhouse. Lichen as gall. Lichen as culture chamber. Lichen as symbiotic phenotype. Lichen as organism, lichen as ecosystem, lichen as emergent property. He doesn't quite succeed. Lichens cannot be likened since they're unlike anything else. Indeed, lichens are their own culture-making depositories of strange life. The algae in this mutualist relationship provides nutrients through photosynthesis for the fungi. And for their part, the fungi protect the algae, helping them to thrive in drier climes. This familiar sweetness, this unusual kinship also offers sustenance for other species. Some birds will strip lichens from trees to furnish the lining of their nests. Some humans will drop to their knees to examine them. And what can I say of this marvelous plural thing? This beautiful, blotchy, multicolored, not animal, not plant, more than human warehouse. This bioindixical counter of air quality. This tiny organic engine containing two separate identities. Lichens are their own empire, their own fantastic kingdom of small likeness. Lichen as vertical geography, lichen as horizontal collage, lichen as forensic analysis, lichen as molecular commons, lichen as evidence-based disciplines, lichen as collaborative anarchy, lichen as democratic telephony, lichen as surface readers. Lichen as surface readers. As organic communities, lichen ignore depth in favor of the axis, the dimensional, the parataxis. They're expert, non-discriminating counter-scholars of the layer, madly blanketing the rinds of trees and rocks, benches and metal, plastic, bone and glass, regardless of elevation and climate. They are the small kingdoms of likeness. While lichens have a superficial relationship with trees, their hospitality doesn't always benefit the surfaces of non-sentient environmental and cultural entities to which they can be quite destructive. Case in point, for her 1922 doctoral dissertation, Ethel Meller documented 16 vitriculous species of lichen on the surface of stained church windows in France. Certain colors show more susceptibility to alteration than others, she notes. Purple, green, blue, red, amber, and particularly amethyst glasses are all deeply corroded, while grey tones are less so, and the golden yellow glass resulting from the vitrification of the silver salts is more than or less immune. In his poem, Springtime in the Rockies Lichen, beat poet Luouch calls them tiny acid factories and crumbler of the rocks, two compelling images that gesture to the potent industriousness of these non-human workers. These annihilators of religious relics, these miniature ecosystems, these fungal greenhouses elide the separation between human and wilderness, rural and urban spheres, for they epitomize nature culture, a concept that Donna Haraway employs to describe the synthesis of nature and culture, the human and the non-human. Indeed, we cannot read lichens without the cultural imaginations of biology, art, and poetry, given how language loaded they are. Look at Galwood's analogies. Lichens are embedded with signs and interpretations. Semiotics entrap me too. Lichens are open culture chambers, biosocial destroyers of rocks and stained glass windows. Wow, forget it. We're not living in the Anthropocene, it's the lichen scene. Lichens' power lies in their surface spreading of small catastrophes. Reading lies not only in the surface spreading of small catastrophes, but also in the signs of what is obvious. Surfaces might imply a conceptual binary between layer and depth and thickness. But in the way we read now, the 2009 special issue of Representations, Stephen Best and Sharon Marcus offer a more nuanced definition of the purposeful surface. A surface, they claim, is what is evident, perceptible, apprehensible in texts, what is neither hidden nor hiding, what in a geometrical sense has length and breadth but no thickness, and therefore covers no depth. A surface is what insists on being looked at, rather than what we must train ourselves to see through. Surfaces are what the lichens attract, a layer resistant to the rhetorical frames of the lens, channel, and what's underneath the text, where true meaning is said to reside. Look here, I'm guilty. I've also committed crimes against interpretation. How many times have I informed students that a frame or a concept is our channel through which we can analyze a text? How often I have encouraged them to push through a poem and see what's really underneath it. And worse, how many times have I demanded that they dig deep to explore what real meaning is behind the text? Surfaces, I infer or imagine from Best and Marcus' definition, permit a spreadable reading, an open strategic mode of interpretation that is ambulatory and disjointed. Surface reading is the wow, and not a search for the final significant point, the be-all and end-all, the big takeaway. It's not about finding and developing smooth argumentation, but rather it is the desire to observe, connect, and do. Surface reading is the uneven reading of looking at. Surface reading is the uneven reading of looking at. Lichens don't read surfaces symmetrically. They grow haphazardly depending upon the conditions of the layer, upon the rough rinds of trees and rocks, benches and metal, plastic and bone. And this patchiness is owed to their unusual methods of sexual reproduction. They granulate and crumble. They disperse on the wind. The fungi can also produce spores, but however lichens choose to reproduce, each dispersal of their bodies is an encounter with chance. Where they land is an opportunity for new growth, new surfaces for reading a tree, the soil, a rock, a bone, a stained glassed window. The surface finds its purpose through the lichen. Its identity is transformed when it opens itself to the lichen's industrial acid factories. For lichens, an unwelcoming surface means death, while a barren surface encourages them to thrive and to connect. They are, as like Welch writes, the stamps on the final envelope. For each small patch, lichens are their own little worlds, planetoids on a fallen log, Plutos on a rock. And everywhere I look, I see millions of their small gestures. Everywhere I looked, I saw nothing of their small gestures. On one particularly hot summer day, I was a tree walking in the Riverview Nature Park on the edge of Nebraska City, searching for some lichens. I had come to Nebraska for an artist residency, and I'd hoped to use this time to think and reflect as I worked on my next manuscript, All Our Names Are Kin, a field guide to future flora. As I researched Midwestern plants, I realized that lichens were outside of any botanical frame of reference. Like Welch, all these years I overlooked them in the racket of the rest. I was thus insistent on my walk to locate various species of lichens, if only to photograph their presence. I truly wanted to see them. It had rained heavily the night before, and the morning's moisture remained suspended a foot above the O horizon. Against the canopy and tree trunks, my body felt transformed into tubulars of hard light. I could smell tubs of forest scent, damp soil, car exhaust, hollowed bodies of beeches lying prone on the floor, wet leaves still in flight, motorized carapaces of beetles aloft in pencil webs, uncanny insects in their process of deletion, hostile tumors bursting from debris. I may have noticed the scent and the light, but on the surface, I was a terrible close reader of the woods. I wasn't proficient at fighting lichens, despite the fact that they are literally everywhere. I live too much in my head. I don't observe, connect, or do. My walking companion, Mayor, however, missed nothing. She saw everything, the fantastic facts in the smallness of the fallen log, the boisterous mushrooms provoked into bloom, little caps in delight pushing through the wet earth, a bent plastic picnic table and bench. How could I have missed this debris? Covered in moss and a heft of air. The snail shells wedged into the dirt, the tick on my leg, the misshapen trees that had uprooted themselves, fleeing from the forest path. Maya was familiar with the approximations of space. She understood, or appeared to, the concept of the middle. The forest was full of it. Spatiality was a constant diffusion. Events happen everywhere, in the weeding bed, the canopy, the detritus, and the disagreements between them. We ambulated down the path without any sense of definition. At one point, we traipsed up a hill and found ourselves at another parking lot, another entrance, another open road, another center. Forget it. Where did we begin? I'm constantly reminded how it's impossible to escape in America. Remoteness is another configuration of not urban, but also not rural. Nature culture. We retraced our steps with Mayor pointing at curiosities along the way. Look here, she said. Look here, and here, and here, and here, here. Wow, I said. Wow. I'm going to stop there because it goes on for a bit, but I just want to sort of end this reading with a two poems from my manuscript in progress, All Our Names Are Kin. And I will just read two of them. This manuscript is based on imaginary flora in Ohio that I'm imagining might exist in a post-settled climate change future, 300 years, in fact, into the future. And it is written from the perspective of the plants themselves, this kind of strange imaginary flora that has emerged in our heated world. None of the poems are titled, so I'll just read the first two. It's amazing how the sunlight revives the next day. Some trees enjoy a morning constitution. Walking is a poet's reflection. To wander is to wonder. Do systems have a soul, an expression of awe? What is desire if not disgust? What is desire for the hospitality of zest? The mottled lot cancels the threat of an answer. Systems are feeling machines, unless roots that uproot the growed. Kindred refuse notions of stasis and fugitive sensations. A limb is a leaf and repetition. Systems recognize self-expression from the wood and the trees. Bodies with metallic phantoms, pulsing ghosts and bones on the uneven horizon. Truth is a tree. Loneliness surrenders to the kitsch of greens, hues of wheat. Seasons are a measure of cold images. Night, a measure of light. Slow rot is a kind bomb. Microbial dramas, and a reversal of expectations, a nexus of dirt and exudates. What systems are despairingly human. It is not enough to live, but must also suffer. And the last poem that I'll read is also untitled. It's amazing how the sun is a soft structure, a suitor, how the light returns the next day, how systems imagine the end of a world is a continuance of another, how mice digest owls is a reversal of expectations, how cells pass cold images and information to stringy roots, how breath knots and microbes tangle tiny cellular dramas. How for the bat, a white nose is a mile a minute. How the princess tree is a wind spinner. A leaf is a limb, a bad metaphor. How floronauts demand labor from hummingbirds and possums. How a friendly neighbor is a kind bee, is a kind of bee, a kind bomb, a time bomb, a realtor, a mob. How one colony is much like another. How the pollinator trades with the flower. How this meadow of pinks and greens cues hues made of wheat. And a repetition. How a stem is a neck craning with seasonal difference. How the flower head is a fragrant and an intruder. A network of dirt, how a system is a verb, a noun, and something gross in between. Thank you so much.
Oh my goodness. Orchid, your mastery of horticulture and language is truly astounding. I feel like I've learned so much tonight just listening to you. And lichen? I had no idea. I mean, who knew? And now we do, thanks to you. And so many beautiful lines. Some things I jotted down. A beautiful blotchy multicolor And then you go on to say, not animal, not plant, a more than human warehouse, I think is what you said. And that a lichen's power lies in their surface as they spread out, and they're spreading small catastrophes, you said. And then you said little wows. I love that. That just really popped out to me. And then more music from you. Lichens cannot be likened since they're unlike, I think you said anything else, but lichens cannot be likened since they are unlike anything else. And that music that you create with your science is just absolutely amazing, and how they madly blanket things, anything that's still, they blanket the trees, they blanket the rocks, they'll blanket bones, anything that that is still for any amount of time. And then you talked about one of the beat poets, Welch, and he called them tiny acid factories. And I wondered, is that true? I mean, are there lichen that you can actually take a head trip from? That seemed amazing to me, because I certainly knew nothing about that. And then your friend, I think you said her name is Maya, and how she has is so incredibly perceptive that she understands that there's this concept of the middle, and that so intrigued me. And that you say the forest is full of it. And then on to your poems. The line that stayed with me was when you were talking, you were saying these poems were written for our future, when the temperature on the planet is going to go up in degrees, and it's not going to be enough that we live, but that we must suffer. And that's so poignant. So thank you so much for all of that beautiful work. Oh, my head is just spinning from both of you women. Thank you so much. And I'm wondering if our audience has any questions for our two featured readers tonight. I'm going to invite Yaley and Orchid to turn on their video, and we'll see if we have questions from our guests. And if not, I always prepare questions, because I always have questions. Okay, I'll get started, and then if anyone else cares to add a question as we go along, that would be fine too, because I'm not seeing anything right offhand, I don't think. Let me oh, someone says, I wondered what the signers were signing for Be Say Do. There you go. So Nico just did it. So could you do that again, Nico? Be Say Do. Very nice. I love that. Okay. And that person says, so cool. And it is. Yaley, that's one of my favorite poems in the whole world. That beautiful poem of those young boys. Be said do. I can just hear them, hanging out with each other. And it's so beautiful what you've done with it. Okay, so my questions. Okay. Now, I know everybody asks you about your laureateship in Cincinnati, and I certainly do want you to talk about that as well. But the fact that you are a first-gen American, and I apologize again for screwing up where you came from. I mean, I'm mortified about that, and I hope that I did not cause you anguish in not saying that properly. Thank you. You're very kind. But I thought you might want to talk, or maybe you don't, but if you would, talk about that experience of coming to a whole new country. I know your poems talked a little bit about it, or the other option is to tell us about becoming the laureate in Cincinnati, which is an amazing hub of poetry and literature and music and dance and all kinds of art. So either one of those would be wonderful things that I would like to know about you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So I wasn't actually born in Sierra Leone. I'm first generation American, and my family, my parents were born in Sierra Leone. I was born in San Francisco. But in terms of that experience, and I'd still be happy to talk about that, being a first generation American, my parents did a lot to preserve their culture in a way that it was so well preserved that it was a bit vertiginous for me. Trying to understand what American identity meant and trying to understand what Black identity meant in America. And that's not an easy question to or something to even query, because the identities are so manifold and they're so nuanced. And so I don't know exactly what I was trying to figure out, but I wanted to be more American. And so I think that, and I think, like, thinking about how that impacts who I am and my writing, I think writing and being a close observer felt like a way of surviving school, assimilating, understanding cultural norms in America, and understanding my parents better. And so I think that perhaps part of my training as a poet came from close observation that was born out of feeling otherized and marginalized at times. And also feeling incredibly held and understood at other times. And so I think that really sharpened my understanding and just gave me a sense of acuity. And so far as the laureateship, it's wonderful. It's such a blessing to be able to meet different groups of people in formal and informal settings in Cincinnati and beyond, and having the privilege of listening and being a cheerleader, and also being around people who don't necessarily know that they are poets, but have incredible stories to share. And I'm happy we got to be on a panel last week together, Carrie, but thinking about the poet laureateship is also, I think I mentioned this, a product of sensitivity and connection, and dignifying folks. And so, insofar as not being from Ohio, I think one of the other things of the laureateship is I'm a student of the city. And so there's so much that I'm learning about the city and the region and the state by virtue of the laureateship. And got to give you a shout out, Carrie. Like, you are an excellent cheerleader and advocate of voices in Ohio and beyond. So it's always wonderful seeing the ways that you model spaces for others like tonight. And so thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Yaley. You know, I'm a huge fan of you. So, and Sandra, oh, I'm sorry. One of our folks here tonight is asking if you have a book, and I don't think maybe she was here in time to hear about your book. So, do you want to mention that again? The one on the.
Yeah, I have two chapbooks, and I have an anthology that I edited of young voices of young people who had experiences of immigration. My full-length collection of poetry will be coming out next January through Milkweed Editions, and it's called Biseidu. And all of that's on my website, yalala.com. I'll write it in the chat.
Yeah, and I'm sorry. I've been putting all that in the chat as well, and hopefully people have been noticing. But yes, do that, Yaley, if you'd like. That would be great. And there are lots of wonderful things folks are saying in here about both of you. So be sure to check the chat before we leave tonight. Okay, Orchid. So you do work in sound studies. I was reading about it. So I was wondering if you could tell me about that. And then, kind of leading off of that a little bit, so is our Ohio terrain anything like where you're from in New Zealand? And you notice I did not tell people the city you were from because I didn't want to butcher your location as well. So I simply skipped it. So if you would like to tell people exactly the city you're from, you can do that.
Yeah, no, I'm originally from, I'll say it as it is in English, Invercargill, which is right at the bottom of the South Island of New Zealand. I spent significant time working as an art director in Auckland. And then I've also spent significant time in Dunedin, but the town that I'm originally from is Dunedin. Someone in the chat just asked about the background. This is a photo that I took, a Polaroid picture that appears in my first collection, A Year of Misreading the Wildcats. This is a picture of 3 Mile Island, the three funnels of 3 Mile, or the four funnels, I should say, from the nuclear power plant, because I was really obsessed with islands and how islands have been constructed as quarantine sites, as sites for unwanted people, as a way to sort of other people. You know, I'm from New Zealand, which is like a collection of islands. And so I was really sort of fascinated by how some islands have privilege or not have privilege. And 3 Mile Island is in such the cultural imagination that I walked 3 miles to 3 Miles Island. So this appears in my chapbook, in my full-length collection. And Carrie, you asked me about sound studies. Yeah, I mean, I'm really interested in sound and how sound can convey and communicate just by its textures, by its resonance. And it's been something that's always been important to me in my poetry. You probably just hear that I have a New Zealand accent, but I actually have a Southland accent from my country, and it's always been something that's been present, I think, as part of my identity. You know, going around in New Zealand and people would say, "You're from that area," and so, you know, I have been interested in the way that accents work, how sound works. And so when I came to do my dissertation at the University of Pennsylvania, I was working on a dissertation about garbage and poetry. And I was interested, though, in the way that, in the sort of like the areas around poetry readings that don't often be, that are kind of treated like rubbish, or treated as sort of like extraneous. So things like these Q&As, they're not often considered part of the poetry reading. And so as part of my research, I was looking at just these kinds of moments of connection during a poetry reading where people are just chatting and learning. What can we learn about these important moments? What do they say about kinship? What do they say about what's important to a poetry community? But these are often configured as moments that aren't considered relevant, which surprises me, because this is part of the poetry reading. And so that's where my interest to sound studies is, the extraneous sounds, the sounds that we often discard. Yeah.
So the second part of that I should have asked you them one at a time anyway. I wondered about the Ohio terrain as opposed to your native soil, you know, just interested in that.
Oh my gosh, I love the fact that there is so much corn here. That is like completely different from my experience. I mean, you know, I'm from New Zealand, so it's a lot of sheep and cows, and so it is different. I mean, I'm from an area that is farmland, so that side is very recognizable. But where it's also it's hard to explain. There's just a different texture to the landscape that is very unfamiliar, and yet because it is so unfamiliar, it's just so delightful. I get great pleasure in the environment around this area, the deer, I saw the skunks. I mean, they're just so adorable. I really want to pet them, but I've been told that you can't. But they're so gorgeous and so cute. But just the wildlife around here is just so delightful and so unfamiliar to my own sort of cultural upbringing. But in terms of like similarities, not really.
I find that so interesting, and when someone is not, you know, that has immigrated, I always love to hear exactly this, you know, the differences and the things that are alike. I just wondered, do the two of you have a question for each other? Is there anything that came up while you were listening? I always like to ask that, just in case there is something. You don't have to feel pressured, and you don't have to have one if you do not.
Well, I would love to know, what's your favorite poem, Yali? Like, what's a poem that has brought you so much delight and joy?
I really like the poem Thursday by James Longenbach. And yeah, it's a poem that feels good on any day. But on Thursday, like that, there's got to be some word in a foreign language about the way that a Thursday feels the day before a Friday. Somebody was like, well, it's also that feeling the day before you start your vacation is better than the vacation itself. But it's something about like that, the feeling of, I mean, and the last lines are about comfort and safety. And I know he's now dearly departed, but I'm grateful that he put that poem in the world before he left this plane. My question, I think, for you might be something similar. It's always on my mind, like who's part of your poetry, like family tree, your lineage of poetry?
Oh, that's such a great question, and so hard to answer. I don't think they're part of my lineage, but they're a poet that I sort of like really deeply admire, and in terms of what they're doing, in terms of the way that they bring in just histories and histories of place. One of them is Craig Santos Perez. I love his whole series on the unincorporated territory. I think he's just brilliant in the way that he works so intertextually. I love Jennifer Scapitoni. Her Republic of Exit 43 has just been so foundational to my thinking about the environmental humanities. And actually, if I could just do a sort of a shout out in terms of like a collection that I've just read and just deeply admire, it's Don Lee's The Orange Tree. I don't think you're going to be able to see that, but this is an amazing collection, and I've just thoroughly enjoyed reading it. And so I highly recommend. Certainly not, people who aren't in sort of like, I think, my lineage, but people who I deeply admire.
Well, then play cousins. Thank you so much, Orchid.
Anything else? Do either of you want to mention? I think you both have already mentioned you have books coming up, which is the best news ever. Anything else we should be aware of that's coming up that that folks might want to watch out for? And I do want to mention that before we do that you can find Yayla on YAYLALA.com. And Orchid can be found on, it looks like bpress. Does that sound right, Orchid? Works, bpress.com, Orchid Tierney, to find her books. And I like to say that because when we start streaming, people can't see the chat, and that way they'll know where to find you. But of course, they can Google you and find so many things about both of you, and I think they need to do that to be properly informed. So, and so, do either of you have anything else you'd like to share that's coming up that you'd like folks to be aware of, other than end of the semester, feed up for a moment, that sort of thing?
Locally, I have office hours this Saturday for anybody that is local, and we're going to be playing poetry games and reading poems to each other and writing some collective poems from 10 to 2 p.m. at the Mercantile Library. Tagline is "Come for a little, stay for a while." We've had people stop in for 7 minutes and people stay for 4 hours, so please come by. And in May, on May 7th, I will be over at City of Asylum Bookstore in Pittsburgh as part of their Jazz and Poetry Festival. And it will be, I'm pretty sure it will be streamed, and I will be reading poems alongside jazz musicians and the Allegheny County ASL Poet Laureate, MJ Shahin. So I'm really looking forward to that. And that's all on my website. Thank you, Carrie.
Anything for you, Orchid?
Oh, I was just sort of thinking if people are interested, my actual website is orchidtyranny.com. Super, super easy to find. It's just my name. But actually, I'm just sort of struggling. I'm not entirely sure. I don't even know what day it is, but whatever is coming up, you'll be able to find on my website.
I like that. I totally can relate to what you're saying. I know that Yaley can too. Um, well, thank you both so very much for this amazing, amazing evening. It's just been blissful, and you both have given so much, and I appreciate that so much. And um, I look forward to seeing everyone on May the 18th, which is our next event, and I will host Hanif Adurquib, Wandra Chang, and our local Ohio poet Chuck Salmons. So I'm looking forward to that. And I wanted to give you a little sneak peek for come September. Our first event will be a reading from this wonderful Dolly Parton anthology, Let Me Say This, and it's going to be very fun. And this is an anthology put together by Julie Blomecki and Dustin Brookshire, and it's really quite wonderful. So for those of you who are Dolly Parton fans, you're just going to love this. So we're going to get a little crazy in September, so something else to look forward to. And I just want to say thanks again to all who came out this evening and all who will stream later. And thank you to Devin and our ASL interpreters and all the fine folks at Stuart's Opera House for hosting our events. And I just want to tell everybody, stay happy and safe. Good night. See you next month. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.